Cassie stood frozen in the doorway, her mind reeling. Mark's eyes were filled with confusion, as though she were a stranger standing in front of him. The apartment was the same, the furniture familiar, but the look on Mark's face made her world feel alien. "Who are you?" Mark's voice was low, careful, as if trying not to startle her. His gaze flicked to the door, as though he were considering leaving. Cassie opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could he not know who she was? They'd been together for years. Every detail of their life together was vivid in her mind, the weekend trips, their late-night conversations. And yet, standing there, Mark's expression was as blank as if she had never existed. "Mark, stop," she stammered, stepping toward him. "It's me, Cassie. We live together." Mark's brow furrowed deeper, and his hand went to his phone on the counter. "I think you've got the wrong place," he said, a hint of unease in his voice now. No, we just argued yesterday. You were upset because—" She trailed off, realizing she couldn't piece the argument together clearly. It was like fragments of memory floating just out of reach. Mark shook his head slowly, his eyes full of suspicion now. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you should probably leave." Cassie backed up, her heart pounding. She stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath as she tried to make sense of the moment. How could he not know her? Her pulse quickened as she took in the surroundings outside their apartment. It was the same building, but something felt wrong. Small things were out of place. A potted plant missing from the landing, a neighbor's door that was usually covered in decorations now bare. A voice pulled her back. "Hey, Rachel!" The woman from across the hall waved, giving her a friendly smile. "Rachel?" Cassie blinked, trying to recall if she'd ever seen the neighbor before. "No, I'm not." She started to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. The woman gave her a strange look before disappearing into her apartment. Cassie turned and rushed down the stairs, panic clawing at her chest. This couldn't be happening. Cassie darted through the city streets, her breath ragged as she replayed the last few hours over and over in her mind. Mark didn't recognize her. The neighbor had called her by another name. It was like her life had shifted ever so slightly. Just enough to knock her off balance, but not enough for anyone else to notice. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Leah. Leah would know what was going on. She dialed Leah's number, her hand shaking. When Leah answered, her voice was casual, friendly, but there was a strange detachment. "Hey, Cassie, what's up?" Cassie's heart surged with relief. "Leah, thank God. Something's wrong. I don't know what's happening, but Mark doesn't remember me and—" "Whoa, slow down." Leah laughed lightly. "Mark doesn't remember you. What are you talking about?" "I was just there," Cassie said, her voice rising in pitch. "He didn't recognize me. Leah, you have to help me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Cassie," Leah finally said, her tone softening. "Are you okay? I mean, you're sounding a little off." Cassie's stomach churned. This wasn't the reaction she expected. "Off? What do you mean?" "I just saw you yesterday at Dr. Weiss's thing. You seemed fine then," Leah said. "Look, if you need to talk, maybe we can meet up later, but I've got plans tonight." "Dr. Weiss?" Cassie hadn't seen Leah yesterday. And there had been no mention of any party. She opened her mouth to respond, but found herself lost for words. "Leah, we didn't hang out yesterday." Leah let out a small, awkward laugh. "Cassie, we were literally just talking yesterday about how weird Dr. Weiss is. You were joking about his office. Are you sure you're okay?" Cassie's head spun. "Leah, we didn't talk yesterday. I wasn't there." This time, Leah's silence was deafening. Cassie, maybe you should get some rest. You've been stressed out lately." Before Cassie could argue, Leah hung up. Cassie stared at her phone, a creeping sense of dread washing over her. She scrolled through her messages and found texts from Leah about some party with Dr. Weiss. Texts she didn't remember sending or receiving. They talked as if Cassie had been there. Her mind raced. What had changed? What had she done to make everything feel wrong? A text buzzed through on her phone. It was from an unknown number. "You're running out of time. Stop before it's too late." Cassie stood frozen in place, staring at the message. Her heart thudded against her ribcage as she read it over again. Who sent this? She tried dialing the number, but it went straight to voicemail. Without hesitation, she typed back, "Who is this? What do you know?" No response. Cassie pocketed her phone, her mind spinning. If this was connected to the device, then maybe Dr. Weiss knew more than he was letting on. After all, it was his work on temporal mechanics that had inspired her thesis in the first place. But how could he be involved in this? Determined to get answers, Cassie made her way to the university. When she arrived, a small gathering of faculty was outside Dr. Weiss's office, mingling over wine glasses and appetizers. A small, casual party, just as Leah had said. Cassie spotted Dr. Weiss standing by the window, speaking with a group of professors. As soon as his eyes met hers, his smile faded. There was something in his gaze, something wary, as if he'd been expecting her. Cassie didn't wait for him to approach. She crossed the room and pulled him aside, ignoring the curious glances of the others. "What's going on?" she hissed, her voice barely controlled. "What's happening to me?" Dr. Weiss raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but distant. "I'm not sure what you mean, Miss Everett." "You know exactly what I mean," Cassie snapped, her voice trembling. "This device, it's changing things. Mark doesn't remember me. Leah said we spent yesterday together, but I wasn't there. What's happening to me?" Dr. Weiss gave her a long, searching look. "Cassie, time is not as straightforward as people believe. It's not just a linear progression, it's a web, complex, interconnected, and delicate. Every action, every decision pulls at those threads, some more than others." Cassie felt the blood drain from her face. "You know about the device." Weiss didn't deny it. "You've already changed more than you know," he said softly. "The question is, how much further are you willing to go before you realize you can't undo the damage?" She stared at him, her heart racing. "What are you saying? That I've already messed things up?" Dr. Weiss's eyes darkened. "You're tampering with forces that are far more complex than you understand, and once those threads unravel, it's impossible to weave them back together." He looked past her, as if already moving on from the conversation. "My advice, stop pulling at the threads." Before Cassie could respond, Dr. Weiss turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the party, more confused and frightened than ever. Cassie left the university, her head spinning from Dr. Weiss's cryptic warnings. Invisible threads? Forces beyond her control? The weight of his words pressed down on her like a stone in her chest. If he knew what was happening, why wouldn't he just tell her how to stop it? As she walked back toward her apartment, her sense of time continued to fray. It started with small things. The clock on her phone seemed to skip forward by minutes, then back again. Conversations she overheard on the street seemed to repeat themselves, looping phrases that left her disoriented. Cassie stopped in her tracks, gripping her phone tightly. She tried to calm her breath, but a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. She blinked, and when her vision cleared, she found herself standing at the opposite end of the block without any memory of walking there. Her heart pounded as she looked around, realizing she had lost time. Entire moments were slipping through her fingers like sand, and she had no control over it. Panic gripped her. She fumbled to dial Mark's number, desperate to hear his voice again, his real voice, the version of him that remembered her. The phone rang once, twice, then his voice came through, muffled, distant. "Hello?" His voice was barely audible, as if coming from another room. "Mark?" she gasped. "It's me, Cassie. I need to—" But the line went dead before she could finish. Cassie stared at the phone in disbelief. She tried redialing, but now the call wouldn't go through. It was as though he'd vanished entirely from her reach. She stood on the empty street, clutching her phone, unable to shake the feeling that time itself was slipping away from her, taking everything she knew with it. Back in her apartment, Cassie tore through her research notes. If there was any clue about what was happening to her, it had to be hidden in her work on temporal mechanics. She flipped through pages of diagrams, equations, and theories, but none of it explained the growing cracks in her reality. Then something caught her eye, an old folder tucked behind her textbooks. She didn't remember seeing it before. Her name was scrawled across the front in thick, bold letters. Cassie opened the folder, her pulse quickening. Inside were pages of notes, documents that referenced experiments on time manipulation, and charts that outlined theories she had only recently touched on. But the most disturbing part was that some of the documents listed her as a participant. How could that be? She hadn't been part of any experiments, at least not that she remembered. Her eyes fell on a name she recognized instantly, Dr. Samuel Weiss. His name was tied to nearly every document in the folder. Panic welled up in her chest as she realized that this was bigger than she had thought. Dr. Weiss hadn't just been her mentor. He had been studying her, tracking her involvement with time manipulation. But why? Her hands trembled as she flipped through the last page, finding a small, crumpled note stuck inside the folder. The handwriting was her own, but she had no memory of writing it. The message was simple but chilling. Don't trust him. Cassie stood frozen, the note clutched in her hand. Don't trust him. Had she written this? When? And why couldn't she remember it? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the scattered pieces of the puzzle. Was she being watched? Controlled? She had to confront Dr. Weiss again, but when she rushed back to his office the next morning, she found it empty. The door was ajar, and inside his desk was cleared. Files, books, even personal belongings were gone. It was as if he had vanished overnight. Panic set in as Cassie left the building, trying to piece together her next move. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. 2 hours had passed since she left her apartment, but she had no memory of how. She had missed multiple calls from Leah, Mark, and her professor. The phone in her hand felt foreign, as if it belonged to another life. Time was slipping through her fingers, and with every passing moment, her reality seemed less and less stable. She needed answers, and fast. But just as she was about to leave for home, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from Leah. "Cassie, I don't know where you are, but something's wrong. Please don't go back. It's not safe anymore." The line went dead before Cassie could respond. Her heart raced, her mind clouded by fear. What wasn't safe anymore? And who was coming for her?
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.